Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. As we well know, inflation and interest rates are on the way up and economic growth appears to be slowing. But there is some light at the end of the economic tunnel. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. University of Melbourne economics professor Neville Norman says that while things seem grim, Australia is a lot better off than most similar nations. He believes we may escape a recession and that we're approaching the top of the interest rate cycle. Professor Norman starts by explaining to Jeff Waters why he sees a new order emerging in the economy.
Well, we do have a new change, not just in the monarchy, but in the economy, and the developments are not good for business. Can't gild the lily anymore. The question is, how long is this going to go on? The harsh new turns are the slowdown in economic growth, which impacts on business revenues, the surge in inflation, which we're seeing around the world, and of course those rising interest rates from the body that said there wouldn't be any rate rises until 2024. And I want to say some important things about each of those things, the growth, the inflation, and the interest rates. And we need to distinguish between volume things like economic activity, the wretched GDP, prices, inflation, interest rates, and they're all vitally important to business.
Well, let's start with volume and growth. You're foreseeing a slowdown in growth, is that correct?
Yes. And that's the right term to use. There's a lot of talk now about recession, which I think everybody knows is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth in GDP. Now, recession is not good, but it can be exaggerated. Let me say this. We did not get a recession in the global financial crisis about 14 to 16 years ago. We were the only Western economy that did not. But we had a slowdown in growth, which is what I think the prospect is for the next year. More likely than not, we will not have a recession. But we did have one in 2021. We did get 2 negative quarters as a result of the COVID restrictions, not COVID itself. Now, it's important to see that the United States is likely to have a recession. Britain is almost certain to have a recession. All the hype about monarchy and so on is not going to save it. And I've just come back from Britain, and they're dealing with 80 to 90% energy price increases. Ours are a lot less than that. So harsh as it might be, the concerns here are nowhere near as great as in Britain and the USA. For example, inflation is tickering on 10% in both Britain and the USA. I still think, for once the Reserve Bank's got this right, 7 to 8% is our prospect over this time. And nothing's going to stop these central banks raising interest rates for reasons that I disagree with, of curbing inflation. This is not the type of inflation. The Ukraine war, the energy price increases, the shortages, rising interest rates don't address them. What they do is to damage the stock market, as we've seen, and we're starting to see some fall off in housing prices.
If we could come back to interest rates, Neville, sorry, can I just backtrack a moment?
Yes.
You were saying that Australia will avoid a recession as opposed to other countries. Why is that? Why will Australia pull ahead of everyone else?
First of all, because we have a natural growth, normally because of labour force and immigration growth, that is higher than others, and immigration is coming back. Tourism is bouncing back very rapidly, though not from Asia, and that is more important to us. And because the underlying sources of inflation are not so severe. Just to take one, our energy prices are likely to be moving by 20 to 30% compared with 80 in the United Kingdom and the mid-50s in Britain. And those are doing a lot of damage. So there's a few things that make us comparatively better.
So getting back then, as we were talking about Europe and inflation. What happens if this winter of discontent that is coming turns out to be made more problematic by Russia cutting off even more energy supplies, and that's combined with failing crops across Europe as a result of drought? What are we looking at in Europe, particularly in coming months?
Of course, these are the factors that are already supply-side factors behind this, and that will prolong this problem longer so that it increases the risk. I'm not saying we won't have a recession. I'm saying it's much less likely than in those other countries. And those supply-side factors are the ones that are behind. We did survive the COVID restrictions with a quick recession and then came out of it. We're now going back into some difficulties, and business has got to brace for this. And let's just look at a couple of the sectors there. Construction. Not only are building sites taking forever to complete because of supply-side difficulties, both labour and materials, but new construction is scared off by this, and that is the type of damage, and I'm saying that that will continue. But there's many sectors, including agriculture, we don't often mention here, which in many parts of which is booming and likely to boom for the very supply-side reasons we've just talked about, and much but not all of retail. There's still difficulties throughout there, which make us look a lot better. That's my judgment, and that's my answer to that question.
So let's look at the responses then of central banks, both internationally and here in Australia. How do you see that playing out?
Well, they're all the same. I think they're ill-advised, but in predicting what's going to happen, it's not my view, it's what they are driven by. There's no sign that central banks, including in Australia, are resiling from the precept that if they see inflation rising, then they come out saying that we need even higher interest rates, even though after 6 months of doing this, the evidence is that they're not attacking at all. It's like putting petrol on the fire in some ways. So I'm a predictor. It's very important to see that that's their philosophy and nothing seems to change them. But I think we're near the end of the cycle here in Australia. We're close to the top with these rates. Now, it's very important for everyone hearing this to remember that these cash rates that we hear about are not the rates that anyone pays. But it basically means, if we go back and here's some numbers, most housing loans were in the 3.5% to 4% range earlier this year, and they're now around 7 to 7.5%. And that will go up a little more, but not much. I think we're near the end of it. Business loans are about a point higher than the ones I've given. Growth had gone back to 2.5%, and it's now around about 0.5%, and that will continue. But if we look at the United States, growth is hardly moving, nor it is in the United Kingdom, and the Bank of England forecasts have got a recession running for 3 to 4 quarters, and I agree with that, and that's why I'm contrasting that positively. So the role of central banks in all of this is more to curb confidence, and maybe there's an argument that rates should rise, but not the one they're given. People need to appreciate the cost of money and the cost of borrowing, and by keeping interest rates down for so long, when we were warning of that danger for years here on Business Essentials, there was an issue that they should have been putting them up or gradually moving them at the time when they were denying the need until 2024, which I think will go down as one of the most damaging government or bank-led forecasts in history. The prospect is that we're just about near the top of the interest rate rises, and I think that should be comforting. I don't think there'll be a lot of comfort come out of the October budget, and remember that we've still got the resumption of the excise tax prices that were reduced by the Morrison government as an attempt to stem this. It's most likely that the Albanese government will put them back and say that, well, that was just the fault of the previous government, and sometime they've got to do something to repair their revenues. So if we look at prices and inflation, you've got to look at the drivers, which are the Ukraine war, the energy prices and the wage uplifts. And we've done most of the wage compensation. It was done in a hit and it's working through the system. And the unions can rightly argue that wages are falling behind. But the catch-up has some significant consequences, and it's all in the hands of arbitral tribunals here in Australia, which has got nothing to do with the interest rate increases. So the business actions, I think, are important, is you've got to brace for the demand slowdown. You've got to do all that you can to make efficiencies, because the labour and the supply difficulties for material are not solving quickly. Efficiency gains are the ones that will get you through this, and emphasising the product differentiation where you can, that your products are better than your competitors, are going to be the ones that will define the firms that survive this as distinct from the others.
That was Neville Norman, Professor of Economics at the University of Melbourne. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.